good evening, everybody. It's elemental, 9 o'clock in the evening, New Zealand time on Wednesday. And I am back once again with Vince and Julian to discuss elementalism. Hey, guys.
Hey, Bob. Good evening. How you doing?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Actually, it's really good for me today. I have the evening off because Julian is hosting the meeting. So, without any further ado, I will take the back seat and over to you, Julian.
Thanks a lot, Bob, and thanks for everyone joining us in the live chat. Feel free to post your questions and comments in there, and we will discuss them during the show. And tonight's topic is karma. So following on from our discussions in the previous weeks where we've talked about life and death, we've touched on the topics of reincarnation quite a bit, and we're continuing our series looking at elementalism, essentially the perennial philosophy for the new age of Aquarius. So with us once again, we've got Vince McLeod. How's things?
Hey, Jules. Good day, Internet. Yeah, things are going great. Happy to be here. Happy to be chatting again. I'd be even happier if someone would ask a question in the live chat. So if you're listening to this, please do ask us a question if there's anything you don't quite fully understand at any point in this show.
And of course, VJM Publishing produced Elementalism, the book which really contains everything we're discussing in these shows. So anyone that wants more information about anything we talk about, get your copy of Elementalism. So
yep, you can get that on Amazon.
So
on Amazon, or your $9 US.
And the link's in the description.
Yep, links in the description.
Awesome. So in terms of elementalist philosophy, where does karma fit into the whole thing?
Karma fits in by the fact that you've got consciousness as a prima materia, and then that consciousness has a frequency. So the karma, your karma can be thought of as what your frequency ends up attracting. Now, karma is best understood simply as cause and effect. A lot of people misunderstand the concept of karma and think that it means that if you do something bad, then the exact same thing will happen to you. It's not quite that simple. There's no force, there's no judging force watching over us that makes it a sure thing that you get what you deserve. What happens is that your consciousness has a frequency, and if that frequency goes down because of constant selfish actions on your part, extreme selfishness, then you'll attract negative energy. So, and the opposite is true also. If you take a bunch of selfless actions, you will attract positive energy. But there's more to it than simple selfishness or selflessness. Karma really does mean just cause and effect. And so it's strongly related to the sixth Hermetic principle. If you've read the Kybalion, you'll know about the sixth Hermetic principle. And it's really the other way of saying the law of tin, as you could say it in elementalism, because tin is the metal that responds to this particular law. Cause and effect just means the energy you put out into the universe is a similar energy that comes back to you. It doesn't necessarily mean specific acts or specific deeds, but just the general energy.
Yeah, and of course we've talked about what you call the clown world fork, where in Western society we really are given the choice between atheism and religions like Christianity. So, of course, atheists don't believe in life after death, and then the predominant religious view in the West is that you have one life here, and then you go to either heaven or hell. So what do you think needs to happen for this alternative view, which is reincarnation? And it's interesting to note that there's starting to be a movement even amongst Christians to start taking the idea of karma and reincarnation seriously. So maybe also explain how reincarnation and karma are linked.
part of the major problem that we have is we've got an echo now.
Yeah,
We've got an echo. Oh, it's ended. Where's the echo coming from?
I'm not sure. What's changed? That's odd.
I don't know. Something must have become unplugged. Oh no, now there's no echo. Alright. Well, the relation between karma and reincarnation that most people don't get because of the clown world fork that you were just speaking about is that the quality of your rebirth in your next incarnation is a matter of your karma. So if you behave in a particular way in this life, then that'll affect the frequency of your consciousness, which is another way of saying your karmic debt, whether positive or negative, and the frequency of your consciousness will determine the frequency of the environment into which you incarnate in your next life. So if you take a bunch of very low frequency actions in this life, motivated by, let's say, the sort of impulses that you have at the level of lead, basic animal impulses, then your frequency of consciousness will become of the level of lead, and you will reincarnate in an environment that's made up of leaden people. In other words, people who are very bestial. And the opposite is true, of course. If you take golden actions and take actions that are inspired by the eternal truths, inspired by a will to act in accordance with the will of the Tao, then you will have a different cosmic frequency, and you'll incarnate differently. Yeah.
Vince, there's a question here from Hello Boomer. He says, can we measure our own frequency via any method?
Yes, but you can't measure it with an instrument. You can measure your frequency of consciousness. If you would meditate so hard, or meditate so deeply, or take a psychedelic, for example, you might come to the stage where you've completely separated your consciousness from all of the possible contents of consciousness. So there's nothing, you don't think about anything, no thoughts, no sensations, no perceptions, no emotions. It's just your core being, your raw frequency of consciousness. You're there with yourself, and then you can get a perception of what your frequency of consciousness is. This is why some people have bad trips, because they take a psychedelic, and then for the first time ever in their entire lives, they are there just alone with their own consciousness, and they realize they're a very low frequency being, and they freak out about it. They realize that all of their selfish actions that they thought they were going to get away with earlier in their lives have actually impacted their frequency of consciousness, which is simply another way of saying that a person became aware of their karmic debt. And becoming aware of their karmic debt makes a certain type of person freak out, especially those with a big karmic debt. And that's one of the reasons why spirituality really is no joke. Like, if you want to find out about these kind of things, you're going to have to come to terms with all of the actions that you may have taken in previous lives, because as per the law of cause and effect, all of these previous actions will impact your frequency of consciousness, and so they impact the environment that you find yourself in now. Yeah, so regarding measuring the frequencies, you can get a sense all frequency of consciousness can be measured between 0 and 1, with 0 being the lowest possible frequency and 1 being the highest possible frequency. But if you can isolate yourself with your own consciousness, then you can get an idea of where your frequency is between 0 and 1.
And of course, it relates to the law of attraction as well, by the sounds of things. So karma gets generated, through the law of attraction. Positive attracts positive, negative attracts negative. So do you see the law of attraction as being a key part of the whole thing that generates the karma?
Yeah, the law of attraction basically explains how karma works within this life, as opposed to the law of assortative reincarnation, which explains how karma works between lives. So that's the difference between the two. So the law of attraction really says that whatever your frequency of consciousness is, you're going to attract a similar frequency from the outside world. So if you take a certain, let's say you take actions of Mercury, like we've done, like we've studied hard previously in our lives. We've done a fair bit of reading, we've done a fair bit of philosophizing, and so here we are in an environment like this where we can talk about these ideas. Really, that's just karma. The karma has led from one thing to another. Karma doesn't necessarily mean goodness or badness. It just means cause and effect. So the actions you take in one environment will lead to responses in a future environment.
So Hello Boomer wonders what the frequency is of the universe or the prima materia consciousness.
It's what the Hindus call Om. You probably have seen the meditators that go Om. Now that sound is meant to represent the frequency of the entirety of creation. So that sound is meant to represent all possible sounds, all possible frequencies. And so that's why you make that sound sometimes when you meditate, is because you're trying to tune yourself into the great fractal, the entirety of reality. So I think Om, that's the closest you can really get to a single frequency of everything. But if you wanted to think of it in terms of light, it would be just one white light that contained all of the possible frequencies, because then reality is generated by a selective forgetting of those frequencies, and that creates the great fractal through which we are exploring right now.
Yeah, and it also brings up the issue of morality, because obviously if you have good moral values, you attract good karma, and bad moral values, bad karma. And when you look at the atheist ideology, for instance, there's the concept of moral relativism, because there's no ultimate absolute way of judging right and wrong in that framework. But in this framework, there is such a thing as good and evil as an absolute thing, you know. Would you agree with that?
Well, the absolute good is to entertain the gods. That is the highest of all goods. And the lowest of all evils is to act in such a way as to bore the gods. So really, what we're trying to do here is to create a podcast about a subject that people have never spoken about quite like this before. There are so many cliches about the concept of karma, but I would say that karma, good and evil, is just a small part of it, because it's hard to know if an action that you might take is objectively good or objectively evil, especially once you come to thinking about where your laws, where your morality actually comes from. But that's not the main thing. Like if you would act with a good heart, then you will attract other people who act with good hearts, even if they sometimes make mistakes. Whereas if you act out of pure selfishness, you will attract other people who behave in selfish manners.
Yeah, for sure. And there's another good question in the chat, isn't there?
What is the correlation between karma and free will, Vince?
Well, that's a really good question, because it's actually something that Jules and I were talking about before, the possibility of free will. Now, karma is a matter of your frequency of consciousness, and that tells you what you can expect, what frequency you can expect to receive from the outside world. But you always have the free will to focus your attention on a high frequency if you wish to, or to focus your attention on a low frequency if you wish to. Now, an example of that is if you were going to focus your attention on a low frequency, that's when you become resentful and you spend a lot of time brooding about how you've been cheated by other people and how they owe you and that sort of thing. Whereas if you think on a high frequency, you think more in terms of gratitude and humility, and you just try to enjoy the experience of being alive in this time and place, and not worry so much about whether or not you're getting a fair deal or whether or not you're getting ripped off, and all of these low frequency kind of things. Now, as William James said, thoughts lead to action, action leads to habits, habits leads to character, and character leads to destiny. And if you think that through, it really does mean that if you focus your consciousness on a high frequency, you will eventually have a high frequency destiny. And if you focus your consciousness on a low frequency, you will end up with a low frequency density. So yeah, you can have both karma and free will. Those are not incompatible concepts. It's just that your karma will tell you what's happening right now, and your free will is more about where you're going to go in the future.
Yeah, obviously the topic of free will versus determinism is a huge issue in philosophy, and we mentioned maybe doing a whole show on the issue of free will, but it definitely is worth mentioning alongside karma, because you're saying cause and effect is what drives the karma, so that is more of a deterministic thing based on our past actions, thoughts and deeds, maybe even all our past lives. But then free will is something which can potentially transcend determinism, so that we can raise our frequency, and ultimately, the goal for some people is to transcend the cycle of reincarnation, right? So instead of reincarnating and having their karmic debt, they want to use their will to ultimately go beyond the karmic cycle to true spiritual enlightenment.
Yeah, that's right. And as a minor aspiration, that such a goal is certainly capable of entertaining the gods to a great extent, especially when you achieve enlightenment and you're fully at peace and you're fully enlightened now, and then you ask yourself, well, now what? And you realize that once you're fully enlightened, there's nothing more to do than to forget your enlightenment and to reincarnate in a state of ignorance again. So the gods love that sort of thing. They love seeing people strive futilely to escape samsara, only to realize that there's nothing you can really escape from. You're still there with yourself in either case.
Very good. Very interesting. All right, Boomer asks again, can we measure the frequency of potential decisions before making them?
Yeah, you certainly can. Like, if you think about it, if you really close your eyes and imagine yourself taking a particular action towards a person, and then you try to imagine if that's going to increase the amount of suffering in the world or decrease the amount of suffering in the world, you should be able to tell, because you should find that your intuition gives you a low frequency kind of vibration in the case of increasing the suffering in the world. Whereas if you act to decrease the suffering in the world, you should find that your intuition gives you a high frequency kind of a higher kind of frequency. So you should be able to intuit whether your actions are moral or not. But if you can't intuit that, you can always think it through using the more rational part of the brain, and just ask yourself, if other people in my world would behave like I'm behaving, would that give me a high frequency feeling or a low frequency feeling? And if you think that other people behaving in the same way would give you a low frequency feeling, well, that tells you what you're likely to, what sort of energy you're going to attract if you behave like this yourself. Yeah, in elementalism, the idea is that we've got to move past the idea of just having a list of laws or rules handed down. You've got to start thinking for yourself if a particular action is going to lead to an increase in your frequency or a decrease in your frequency.
Yeah, I saw a really good movie recently which was called The Secret of Karma, and it's basically about a guy who he has a near-death experience. It's based on a true story. He's in a hospital and has a near-death experience, and he goes out of his body and he gets to relive a past life where he was a pilot in World War I and World War II, and then he lives a future life where he's in some sort of sci-fi, spaceship or something in the future, but his karma is following him through the different lifetimes, where he essentially would fall in love with his best friend's wife in all these different lifetimes. So he was repeating these similar things, and that was causing him guilt and karmic, he felt karmic debt. But there was also, the idea that, he was just naturally attracted to that woman's soul, and the souls journeying together. And ultimately the message in that movie was that we're not bound by the negative karma, we can ultimately transcend the negative karma and the implications that it could have. So definitely check out that movie. I mean, what do you think, Bob? Does it sound pretty far-fetched to you, the idea of reincarnation?
Sort of yes, and sort of no. I mean, one of the things that I've been discussing with Otto, but this is about a Buddhist perspective of reincarnation, right? One of the things that I've been discussing with him is that it is possible to be reborn, to take a life in one of the Deva realms. And so you don't need to feel that you are destined to only be on earth. You can actually elevate yourself and be born into a heaven realm. And so, from that point of view, I really get it, because why have the ambition to come back to earth when you could have the ambition to go to a higher heavenly realm? So there is a bit of consistency with my old beliefs in it. And I was very interested in what you said earlier about how some Christians even now are considering reincarnation as an option. Because I've found that myself, is that it's not beyond the realms of logical thought, if I can put it like that.
Well, there seems to be evidence that there was belief in reincarnation amongst the early Christian period, and that it was the Romans that did away with it. Empress Theodora, who was married to Justinian, Emperor Justinian, and she wanted to be immortalized after death, deified essentially, and she worried that reincarnation would mean that the public would not see her as a goddess. So there's definitely an interesting theory there, and it could be that this whole idea of reincarnation was much more common than, what people think these days.
It is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
It is fascinating to me. If we do all come from consciousness, and if consciousness is eternal, then it makes sense that the little fragments of consciousness should continue to go round and round in various forms.
And one thing I found interesting was evidence supposedly of young children having memories of their past lives. So according to a video I was watching, there's instances of young children around 2 years old who can start talking about their past lives, and sometimes they'll be a near relative reincarnating back into the same family, but other times they would say they'd be a complete stranger and they would describe a different location in their past life. So certainly a fascinating theory, and it gives people an alternative to just atheism and Christianity, that's for sure.
That's for sure. Yes, that is for sure.
What do you reckon, Vince? Have you heard anything about children remembering past lives and that sort of thing?
I have actually heard some stories about children when they incarnate, when their fragment of consciousness incarnates into this world in a child's body. It doesn't necessarily 100% of the time forget absolutely everything that it knew in the previous life. And so there are still some memories that pass over, even if they're really indistinct. For example, I can remember a previous life in which I was some sort of duke, and I killed somebody with a sword out of the belief that he was plotting against me, when in reality he was actually a friend of mine. So I incurred a massive karmic debt from this particular action. I mean, this was essentially an act of murder. On account of that, I had no actual justification for it. And therefore, that's one of the reasons why I incarnated into this place, which in Elementalism is understood to be one of the hell realms, on account of the fact that we all must die, and we can't survive without killing other things and eating them.
So when you say you have this memory of a past life, how did you come to have that memory? Was it through dreams or through experimental substances? Or
it came to me in a dream when I was really young. I was about 6 years old, and it came to me in a dream. But the thing about the dream was that it felt more real than what this life does, and that's often a sign that it's not so much a dream as a trip upwards to a higher dimension.
And so have you felt like that's affected you in this life with things like guilt and karmic debt?
Well, I think it's given me a natural understanding that if my karma would continue, if my karmic debt would increase further from this point, then, I've incarnated at the absolute bottom of society, right? I'm the son of a gang member in a biker's mob. So I'm really, you couldn't get any lower than this particular incarnation. So I'm afraid, therefore, that if I would continue to behave as I did in the previous life with impulsive violence and so on, that I'd incarnate as an animal, like a dog or something even lower. I mean, this is what Plato wrote about in Timaeus, that the actions that you perform in this particular life influence how you reincarnate in the next life. So that's really just another way of saying that the actions in this life alter the frequency of your consciousness, and then that frequency determines your rebirth. So these beliefs would have been fully believed by all European people before the Christian invasions and their heaven and hell narrative, and which they share with the Muslims. Let's not forget, Muslims also believe that you have this one life and then you either go to heaven forever or you go to hellfire. So the karmic thing is really just a dharmic belief shared by most of the dharmic religions, and its non-belief is really just shared by Abrahamists and atheists.
And dharma means the right way to live in this life, right? That means, like, if you have good dharma, that means that you're getting positive karma. Is that right?
Yeah, well, dharma is just about the law. And so the law, if you follow the law if you think of the law of the Tao, for example, is just essentially the will of God, just the way that things ought to be. You can either follow along with your free will, or you can resist that with your free will. But if you do resist it, there are potentially karmic consequences that you might not like.
And we've talked a bit about psychedelic drugs on the other shows. Like, what impact do you think psychedelics have on people coming to realize things like reincarnation and karma? You know, did that help you understand these concepts or make them more believable to you?
Well, in alchemy, for you to get to the stage where you realize that consciousness is the prima materia, that's meant to be the seventh stage of the alchemical ladder. You start off on the first stage of lead, of course, and then you've got to do the solve and coagula thing 3 times. First time represents the stage of tin, where you realize that you are not your body, and then you coagula to the stage of iron, where you realize that you actually are your body, but you understand how it's your mind is something kind of separate. And then you solve again to the level of copper, where you understand that you are not your emotions, but you are something more fundamental than that. And then you coagula again to the level of silver. And once you understand you're no longer your body or your emotions, you can really play a higher societal role. But if you want to go all the way to the spiritual level, to the priest kind of level, you solve again to the level of Mercury, where you realize that you are not even your thoughts. You're actually something even more fundamental than that. And then once you realize at the level of, you coagula again the 3rd time to the level of gold, and at that point you realize that you are more fundamental than your body, than your emotions and your thoughts. You are actually pure consciousness at the root of all of those things. But that generally takes a while. You know, you've got to get up to the 7th step to realize that. And it's psychedelic. You can just sort of blast up that ladder all the way to the 7th step in one hit. But your mind's got to be amenable to the psychedelic suggestion. Otherwise, you're just going to forget it once you go back to a non-psychedelic state.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you bring up alchemy, because, of course, as you've referenced, the true alchemy is not the purification of physical metals, even though it is possible to make gold out of other metals if you use a radioactive process, but the true alchemy is the purification of the soul, and the gold is the ultimate level of the soul purifying and thereby, clearing their karmic debt and potentially exiting the reincarnation cycle, right? So I think a lot of people don't realize that alchemy is about the purification of the soul, and the metals are the analogy, right?
That's right. We learned at high school that alchemy was rubbish because you can't actually take physical lead and make it into physical gold. But the truth is that alchemy is not even about that. Alchemy is about transmuting the frequency of your consciousness from the lowest level, which is represented by lead, to the highest level, represented by gold. And you go through the 5 steps that I mentioned previously with the solves and the coagulas. And this was understood going all the way back to the ancient Egyptians, but it had to be, during the Dark Ages, if you spoke about this kind of thing, you got murdered, right, because you were a witch or a warlock or whatever. So it had to be hidden in the form of metaphor, the most obvious way was to talk about the transmutation of metals. So people could talk about the transmutation of lead into gold, and ignorant outsiders would think that they were merely misguided fools who were trying to get rich quickly, like fools. But in reality, they were talking about something much, much more valuable.
Gosh, how fascinating. Okay, there's another question here from Hello Boomer. He is interested in, what is he calling it? Simulation theory. He says it sounds like the universe is simply the construct within which consciousness refrains. The current favorite is, of course, the simulation theory.
Yeah, that's a very similar way. That's another way, really, of saying, repeating the second tenet of elementalism, which is that the conceivable universe is divided into consciousness and the contents of consciousness. If you think about the universe as simply a subset of the possible contents of consciousness, then it makes more sense than thinking of the universe as a material thing. So the entire great fractal really is all of the possible contents of consciousness, and within that great fractal, our universe is just a subset to which we appear to be limited for whatever reason. Potentially because, as we spoke about in a previous episode, our karmic debt might be so great that the beings in the higher dimensions of the great fractal don't want to associate with us. In the same way that when you go into town, you go to a fancy restaurant, you don't want to associate with some stinking bum who walks in off the street stinking of piss. You want to have a nice environment where it's just people of a certain level of quality. And unfortunately, for those of us who may have a big karmic debt from actions like I described in my previous life, you might get relegated to a place like planet Earth and have to incarnate here with all the violence and massive narcissism and egoism and just chaos and madness, which of course entertains the gods, hence why we're here ultimately, but it doesn't mean it necessarily has to be a lot of fun for us.
So guys,
yes.
You've been talking about karma as if it's just what you do, but in Buddhism, you get karma from what other people have also done. Other people's karma sometimes, reflects on you, impacts you. Does that happen in elementalism?
Yeah, well, elementalism has the same belief of the interconnectedness of all things. I mean, Buddhism believes in the interdependence of all things, therefore it makes sense that if you were to increase your karma in this world, you'd also act to increase the karma of all the other beings, even if only very, very, very slightly. So yeah, that idea makes perfect sense, especially the interdependence of all things. That's an idea that follows naturally from the belief that consciousness is the prima materia. Once you realize that ultimately what we all are is just consciousness, then it follows perfectly logically that we're all interdependent.
So if someone else is sending you positive energy, that can potentially boost your karma, well, it's an interesting concept for sure.
Yeah, like if you take actions that increase the frequency of your consciousness through gaining positive karma, then that might increase the quality of life of somebody who lives down the road from you, even if you haven't directly, personally interacted with them, just simply by the fact that you're interdependent. So your actions might benefit somebody who go on to benefit somebody else, who go on to benefit somebody else, and so on in a chain until it leads to somebody you've never met. But in theory, that's what we all benefit from ourselves, the fact that we got to incarnate in a civilized society and not just as chimpanzees in something like the Gombe Chimpanzee War. You know, that's because we do actually have some karmic credit coming into this place. It's not just all negative.
And of course, you know, people talk about reincarnating as an animal if you behave badly, but from the research I've seen, particularly like Dolores Cannon talks a lot about reincarnation. Generally, people are progressing up the ladder as they reincarnate. So, particularly if you have, you know, positive deeds, then you would go from an animal to a human, most likely, and you would, like you say, go up the ladder of the alchemical metals. So, yeah, the ideal is to be able to direct that at will, because it's not just exiting the reincarnation cycle. You may want to use your free will to direct what sort of life you reincarnate into in your next life, right? And the idea of that you could become a famous person if you try over and over, and eventually, you know, you could get there, become a prominent person in society or something like that.
Yep. Yeah. Well, if you repeated the same actions across multiple lifetimes, then they ought to be very deeply embedded in your frequency of consciousness, and therefore you'd expect that they would make you extremely well gifted in certain areas. Like somebody like Kane Williamson, for example, who's extremely good at cricket. He may have been a professional cricketer for 1,000 different lifetimes, 1,000 lifetimes leading up to this one. And so it's just totally natural for him. It's just totally embedded into his frequency of consciousness that that's what he does. We've got a comment here from Hello Boomer I think is really interesting. Ultimately, all of these systems are attempts to control the one thing we really do know is real, the here and now of our existence. Yes, that's true. I think that's another way of saying that consciousness is the prima materia. That's actually the only one thing that we really do know is real. The only really one thing you do know is real is that you are conscious. The material world, you don't know if that's real. You don't know if that's going to maintain. You don't actually know if it's going to be here tomorrow, because you might die. Your physical body might die, and you incarnate somewhere else. But even if you do, you will still fundamentally be a fragment of consciousness. You will still be conscious, and you will still be making sense of the world in terms of good and evil and masculine and feminine. But that's why elementalism gets back to the very elemental truths, the elemental basics of, you are just a fragment of consciousness trying to control the one thing we really do know, the here and now of our existence, which is, of course, consciousness and the contents of consciousness.
Now, it's also interesting that the Matrix movies reference karma quite a bit, and there's the scene with Neo with Ramachandra, and they are discussing karma, and he's actually a machine from the machine world. So it's interesting that in that movies they give the AI machines karma, but they see that sort of as their programming or their destiny, like their karma is to follow a certain path to fulfill their purpose of their program. And of course he sacrifices himself for his daughter Sati, and Sati goes on to, of course, be one of the main characters in the fourth Matrix movie. And if anyone hasn't seen the fourth Matrix movie, I reckon it's a great movie. It may not have got great reviews, but a lot of philosophy has gone into those scripts, obviously. So what do you think of the idea of karma relating to programming, and can we see it as our own programming?
Yeah, you can see it as the programming of the soul. Like if you just program, if the events if the actions that you carry out have a karmic consequence, that karmic consequence is just programming your soul to attract actions like the one you just sent out to the universe. There's the same thing with, like, if you take low frequency actions like violence and stealing and telling lies. You can do all these things, and then what will happen is you'll have a low frequency of consciousness, and then other people will feel like on account of that low frequency it's justified to do the same things to you. So people who tell lies get lied to, people who steal get stolen from, people who are violent attract violence, and it's really a simple matter of that just being their frequency of consciousness. That's all that karma really is, just cause and effect. So if you act through violent causes, you will receive violent effects. Even if you think you can get away with things by being a materialist and escaping your consequences, you still carry them around in your soul.
So someone who's violent in this lifetime could potentially be the victim of violence in another lifetime.
Yeah, that's right. That's very, very possible. That's entirely possible. In fact, that sort of teaching is really the basis of the idea of karma, which is to say you should think about giving into your animal impulses in this life, because if you do, then you'll incarnate in a place where other people also do, and that might not be much fun.
But of course the concept of the divine and reincarnation is very much suppressed in the West, so we think of humans as being the highest form of consciousness already, right? But people who take psychedelic drugs, they talk about encountering things like DMT entities and conscious entities, which are essentially in this hyperspatial realm. So that shows that there is higher forms of consciousness than humans. It's probably our ego that makes us think that we're the most advanced form of consciousness in the universe.
I think it is the ego, and also an inability to conceive of anything greater than ourselves, which is really the same thing as the ego. Like, a lot of people can't conceive that if you behaved really well in this life for, let's say, 100 lifetimes on Earth, and you behaved the right way, that you may have purified your frequency of consciousness to a sufficient extent to incarnate in a high dimension. Like, that's hard for people to really get their heads around, because they don't believe in an afterlife, they don't believe in reincarnation. But that's something I think we should also talk about, which is the moral consequences of a belief in karma versus the moral consequences of a non-belief in karma. Because you see, as per the Clown World Fork that you were talking about before, if a person is an atheist and they don't believe in karma and reincarnation, then they've got much less of an incentive to behave in a civil manner during this life, because they don't worry about whether or not they're going to have it reciprocated in the next life. They don't care on account of that. They don't believe in it. So they just behave however they like. And you see the same thing in Christianity, where you can just ask God for forgiveness and then the slate's wiped clean. So you can take any action you want. Like Jeffrey Dahmer apparently converted to Christianity just before he was murdered. So the 20 or so people he murdered, he just more or less got away with it on account of, according to Christianity, on account of that he welcomed Jesus into his life, and therefore the slate was wiped clean. And so these are the competing narratives that we've got, as opposed to the karma narrative, which says that every action you send out to the universe has consequences back to you, which makes people think a lot more about what they do, rather than just sort of blunder into it like beasts.
Yeah, and I mentioned moral relativism, and there's also, like you say, there's no consequences for your actions if you think there's no afterlife, because, like you say, if you killed someone, there's no punishment after death. That's the belief. But, of course, these atheists could be wrong, and then, of course, they still have to suffer, terrible karmic debts and consequences as a result.
But you can imagine how much it would entertain the gods to observe a person who fully was an atheist, 100% atheist, absolutely godless, 100% godless, and live a godless life of criminalizing other people and raping and stealing and murdering and drug dealing and so on. You imagine how entertaining it would be to watch such a person die and then wake up in the real world and realize that karma was actually a thing, and that the world in which they woke up in was a reflection of that karma. It would be awesome. It would be absolutely keno. Watching someone who was so smug about getting away with all of their actions, just suddenly getting slapped and realizing that in fact they got away with nothing. I think that would be premium entertainment.
Yeah, and likewise with the example of the person who commits sin and then converts to Christianity just before they die. They could end up having huge negative karma as well, and obviously there's probably more to it. You probably don't just have to believe in Jesus to have all of your sins forgiven. You would have to ultimately raise your own frequency to the point of enlightenment, right?
Yeah. No, that's right. That's a political thing, the priesthood, they tell lies in order to gain material wealth and power. And that's why religions keep having to be refounded, because they always accumulate just lies. Like I know for a fact that 200 years from now, if Elementalism was a popular religion, there'd be priests within that religion telling lies for their own political gain, material gain, and that at some point in the future you'd have to start all over again.
Yeah, well, that's really the difference between the perennial philosophy and the religions, is that obviously the perennial philosophy is always there, and these religions are springing out of that philosophy, and things like Hinduism were originally just meant to be philosophical concepts, and they've been turned into religions. You have man-made religious organizations and priesthoods and things.
Yep.
So, ultimately getting back to philosophy is more pure than any form of religion, don't you think?
Totally, absolutely. Relates to another question we got here from our reliable friend, Hello Boomer. Is karma political? Oh yeah, karma is absolutely political, because the nature of the actions that you take in this life will be reflected in your next life. So, for example, you took a very cruel and hierarchical view of reality, then that's the kind of view of reality that you can expect people to have in your next incarnation. So yeah, well, if you behave in a way so that everything around you is harmonious, which is in theory the goal of politics being the goal of the art of arranging human societies, so that in theory they've got as little conflict as possible, then yeah, that's a lot about karma. Like if you don't care about politics in this life, you say, well, politics is for other people, it's not my problem. Well, then you're going to reincarnate in a world full of people who do the same thing, and they're also going to be indifferent to you and your suffering, and they're not going to act to help you potentially through the political system, just like you didn't. So basically, you get what you deserve, which is really what the whole idea of karma comes down to.
What?
And there's also, go ahead.
What about if you try really hard and you're really moral and you really care and you act according to just love and compassion and everything, and bad things keep on happening to you?
Well, that's possibly because you've got a large karmic debt, and that means that you've got a lot of energy keeping you at a low frequency. So in order to raise your frequency, you might have to keep doing compassionate things. You might have to keep behaving in a compassionate manner for several lifetimes. Well, I expect this myself on account of being a murderer in a previous life. I don't expect that I'm going to reincarnate somewhere particularly awesome in my next life. I just think it'll be better than this, because I think I've mostly added to my karmic credit. So, yeah, like it really is a matter of just doing the right thing for long enough, even if it's multiple lifetimes. It's not really for you to decide, because it's kind of baked into the laws of reality, you see. So you just have to, if your true will is for there to be compassion in the world, then that'll be reflected in what happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, with the political thing, conscious karma is obviously also affecting the collective subconscious as well, isn't it? So the whole of society probably has karmic things going on, So, and in terms of negative things happening to us, it's not necessarily 100% due to our own, bad karma. It could be that, there's a suppression of people trying to become spiritually enlightened. So it's possible that we are also coming under spiritual attack, and that forces are trying to suppress people coming to this knowledge and that sort of thing.
I think it's definitely true we're under spiritual attack. You just have to ask yourself how often it ever happens in, for example, the mainstream media, that somebody would respond positively to the concept of karma and reincarnation. That essentially never happens. Like, they'll never ask Christopher Luxon if he believes in karma or reincarnation, or if it's important to him, or why it's important to him. Like, they just will never talk about it. You'll never see on the news an advocate for the belief in karma come on and start talking about karma. They just want to sell things. They just want to make money, and they just want to increase their own political power. So, that's why it's so ugly. It really is suppressed. The spiritual truths truly are suppressed for the sake of power, and that really is black magic. Well, that's what black magic is, telling lies for power.
Just in respect to that question, we have all sorts of people playing different roles in society, and some people are playing the role of the tyrant or the oppressive government forces, and ultimately it's part of the struggles that we go through and have to overcome, when the state, for example, tries to arrest people for using cannabis and things like that, and all of the restrictive things they've done. But ultimately it is the law of attraction, because there's millions of people who are attracting authoritarianism because they think it's perfectly acceptable. So, often there's the saying, people get the government that they deserve when they vote, Might not be the best government, but they get the one they voted for.
Yeah, well, you see all the leftists right now who are complaining about national repealing tobacco prohibition. Well, these leftists want to have tobacco prohibition, and so they're trying to force prohibition on other people. Well, it's like, if you do that, then your karmic consequence is to have other people force prohibition on you, so you get cannabis prohibited. Like if you incarnated in a place full of this particular karmic debt, that probably reflects the karmic debt that you incurred in your previous life. In other words, the frequency of consciousness that you were on. So for us to incarnate in this world full of the war on drugs, then perhaps we were particularly intolerant in previous lives, and now we're getting a taste of our own medicine. Yeah, Hello Boomer says, our peaceful existence was shattered when a new government formed. Karma.
It's true, wasn't it?
It's like that.
It's really nice when they were negotiating, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can see really in politics how karma leads from one thing to another. Like the arrogance of the Labour Party built up a karmic debt that resulted in them being voted out of power. And the same deal with the Fifth National Government. John Key's arrogance built up a debt that resulted in him being voted out of power. And John Key only got in because of the karmic debt that the Labour government had, Helen Clark before him. So it's the same deal.
And we've seen all these woke policies being pushed down people's throats for the last few years, so the pendulum swung back, and now, the liberal loonies are just freaking out about everything that's happening, but it's ultimately a result of them going too far in the other direction. So,
Yeah, that's the important thing to remember about karma from an elementalist point of view, is that it reflects the pendulum of masculine and feminine, just as much as the pendulum of good and evil. I mean, everything you do has a place not only on the good and evil axis, but also on the masculine and feminine axis. So if you behave in a particularly masculine manner, then you'll attract a masculine environment. And if you think that's good or not, well, that's that really depends on what you wanted at the time.
And of course, that's depicted in the Quadrigitu, right, on the cover of your book. And like Bob's saying, many of us have negative things happening to us in our lives and things, but that could mean that we're coming through that part of the cycle where we're coming out of the black and into the blue, right?
Yeah, like going through tough times doesn't necessarily mean that you should be suffering or that you should feel bad. It could also mean that the right-hand side of the Quadrigitu is very close. So it could actually mean you're about to experience some really good times. Now, I've got another question from a new person here, Griffin Ladd. That's very good. Thank you, Griffin Ladd, for your question. affect your dreams, don't you? Yes. In our dreams, we sometimes see and talk to our dead relatives. Some are very real. In a trip, does anyone ever see or talk to their dead relatives? Any idea why or why not? Yes, you can totally do that. And the thing is, your dead relatives, the vibration that you experienced as them in this world, in this universe, on planet Earth, that vibration still exists in higher dimensions, because all vibrations are, again, somewhere between 0 and 1. You've got the 0 of the complete Earth, the complete feminine, where there's no energy at all, and you've got the 1 of the full energy, the fire, the most extreme masculine. All human beings, just like all creatures, are somewhere on the spectrum between 0 and 1 on the vibrational spectrum. So when you encounter beings in dreams, or when you encounter beings on trips, they are just creatures that are somewhere on the spectrum from 0 to 1. So yeah, you can talk to any dead relative from any previous life as well. You can go back. You might dream. Some of the people you meet in your dreams may be relatives from 100 lifetimes ago. And if you really enjoyed their company, you might have a kind of soul bond. You might have that your frequencies of consciousness have a particular harmony, such that they attract each other throughout time.
Yeah, that's interesting that you point out that psychedelics can make you feel closer connection to your ancestors. And it's interesting that it's all in our DNA code as well, obviously, that our DNA is passed down from our ancestors. So ultimately that vibrational coding could be in there. But when you, for example, Terence McKenna and his brother Dennis took a large psychedelic trip in the Amazon, and Dennis was able to act out the characteristics of many of his ancestors, and he was able to go through and actually, be able to connect with the identities of his ancestors through the psychedelics. So that's certainly an interesting concept that I believe it is, in theory, possible to communicate with dead relatives on psychedelics, but there's also, the aspect where it's hard to control a drug experience. If you have ultimate control over your own mind, it's easier to control the direction of the experience.
Yeah, I think in higher dimensions, people have got more control over their own frequency, and so they can it's really easy then to just tune in to to somebody else's frequency, and then that would be just like sitting there and talking to them. But here on this earth, we've only got really crude methods because we're crude beings. You can meditate as well. It's not just psychedelics or dreaming. You can also meditate, and if you meditate so much that it's just your consciousness and the vibration of and frequency of the person who you're trying to connect with, then you can just tune into that particular part of the quantum G2 that is them. Yeah, because everybody is of course consciousness fundamentally, but the part of them that you experience as a relative of yours is a material phenomenon, and so that has a vibration that has a specific point at which that is on the great fractal, and you can return to it. But it's just hard to do for us because we're unskilled in this place.
And there was also a comment about where is memory stored. So, is memory stored in the brain, or is it stored in the so-called Akashic record, or how would you see it as an elementalist? As
an elementalist, I would see memory as part of the frequency of consciousness, because the theory that the brain stores memories cannot explain how you can have a dream and then recognize people in that dream. Like if you're having a dream, in theory, your brain in the dream world shouldn't actually recognize another person according to what you learned in your life outside of the dream world. But you can still recognize these people. You can say, oh, hey, this is my grandfather I'm communicating with now. So memory must be something beyond even the brain, which is getting a bit mysterious. Really, it's hard, not easy to draw concrete facts about this particular topic.
Yeah, well, something we can discuss more on another show for sure. So it's great that we got all the questions there from Hello Boomer and Griffin Ladd. That it's really awesome that you're engaging with the conversation, and we're pretty much run out of time. So Did you guys have anything else you wanted to add in there?
No, I just wanted to say thanks to Hello Boomer and Griffin Lad for asking your questions. And just remember that you've got the free will to raise or lower the frequency of your consciousness. So you can stop listening to the show, and if you want to improve your world, you can go out and gain some karmic credit and then see how long it takes to improve your environment. Hopefully you can improve it in this one lifetime. You don't have to wait until the next lifetime.
Yep. And, don't be held back by your negative karma, because we can ultimately overcome it from free will. So maybe next time we can talk about free will as a theme, or on one of our future shows.
Yeah, no, free will could be a very good topic, because negative karma doesn't mean you have, it's not like you're tied to an anchor and you're sinking to the bottom of the ocean. You know, it's not a death sentence necessarily. Hello Boomer says, good night, good people. Om. Yeah, that's right. That's what, remember that frequency of the great fractal. Om. Yeah.
Wonderful conversation. Thanks so much, Jules and Vince. We will be back again next Wednesday at 9 p.m. New Zealand time. So until then, I hope you make some good karma for yourselves. Bye, guys.
That's it. Cheers,
Sounds
Internet.
good.
Cheers,
Cheers.
Bob. Cheers, Jules. See you next time.